Well, to start, can you tell us a little bit about your new book, Preserving Lives?
How little would you like to know? It was a genuine labor of love that I never thought would. When I first thought about it was a long time ago, like 1980, when I found a scrapbook of my mom's. And the truth of the matter is that most of the material that's in there, I really wasn't very familiar with. It had been kept in boxes and so forth. My parents both died very young. My mother was only 54. My dad was 62. But they had saved a lot of things, and it ultimately all went to me. And at some point, I started looking at this stuff far more seriously than I had in the past. The only thing that I was truly familiar with were two scrapbooks. One that my mother had made in the late 20s and early 30s. That was sort of a scrapbook about a young woman in East Texas of sort of modest middle-class background, getting to be a grown-up girl and falling in love with a handsome soldier. I had shown the scrapbook in about 1981 or 2 or something like that to Jackie Onassis, because at that time she was the editor of another book I was doing. She thought it was beautiful and charming and sweet and so forth. And that's her saying hello. But it was at the time when there were some books that were coming out called The Diary of a Victorian Lady and stuff like that that were successful. But she didn't think it was that kind of thing. So I just put it on the shelf. The only part of the book that I was very familiar with was my father had created a very large scrapbook based on the photographs he had taken in World War II in the Pacific. He had done that when he had come back from the Pacific. He was in military hospitals for about a year, taught himself how to be a leather craftsman and things like that, and made this beautiful scrapbook full of interesting war photographs that ranged all the way from when he first hit one of the islands all the way through Japan. And I had seen that, but hadn't paid much attention, never even talked to him about it very much. He didn't talk about the war. But excuse me, that book was based on something that he did and completed actually while he was at school at TCU here in Fort Worth. Because all of I said he taught himself how to do leather work. All of the leather supplies that he bought in those years all came from Tandy, which was, became Radio Shack. But when my father was doing that, it was a place to get, I guess, hobby kind of stuff and big sheets of leather and things. He not only made that scrapbook with a beautiful designed cover and everything, but he made purses for my mother and cowboy holsters for me and things like that. But in any event, those are the only things that I really knew. I knew those two scrapbooks. And then everybody died, and I wound up with all the material that was in the house in Tyler. And just as they never threw anything away, I didn't either. And I had a big 13-room studio in New York City, and I just brought everything that was in the house in Tyler and put it in the house in New York, and then ultimately took it from that house and put it into a even bigger place in Pennsylvania where I could store things in an attic and whatnot. And ultimately I found all this material and started looking at it and organizing the pictures around my mother and around my father and around this and that. And the more organization that I accomplished, the more likely it seemed to me that there might be a project here, and the project is that. it's fun to see a project between covers,
Yeah, absolutely.
as opposed to in somebody's feeble mind.
Yeah. Well, looking back on some of the memories in the book, or just some that didn't make it in the book, would you share one of your favorite childhood memories with your family?
Well, there were so many, because I was kind of lucky in that for the first part of say from 1942 to sort of late 45, I didn't have a father. He was away. He was in the Pacific, doing all of that. But after that, from say 1945, 46, all the way through high school and college as well, partially, they were always there, and there were never any. I was sort of very lucky in that there was never any stress. There was never any, saying that person is a bad person, or there was never any racial discrimination or religious discrimination or any of that kind of stuff. They just let things happen, and I remember that one of the nicer things, particularly when I see what parents making their children play football or hockey or basketball or whatever they want to do, and then the parents being terrible and beating up umpires and things like that. I mean, I started playing ball games and things like that when I was 7 or 8, 9 years old, and did it all the way through college. They never once told me to play or not play. They never once came to a game or anything and screamed on the side of the sidelines and behaved badly or set their hair on fire or whatever these people do who are so trying to force their children to be athletes. But they never forced me to do anything. They never made me read. I just did it. They never made me do this or that. They just created an environment where you could do whatever you wanted to do, and within boundaries. I mean, they wouldn't. I mean, if I wanted to go out and burn down the garage, they probably wouldn't approve of that. But it's sort of like they treated me like a grown-up from the beginning, which is but a specific incident. I don't know. It was 21 years of specific incidents that were lovely all along the way. I mean, I got yelled at occasionally because I didn't want to wear a hat and it was too cold. And they said, "You can't go out if you don't wear a hat." Well, we figured that out eventually, and and it wasn't too cold, I guess, because I'm 109 years old and still breathing. More questions?
Yeah, let's say you see someone looking at your book in a bookstore. What would you say to them?
Buy two. Buy one is cheap. Actually, that actually happened to me, not with this book, but with another one. I had to go to a screening of a movie that I had worked on, and it was at a wonderful theater that shows, not Clint Eastwood movies, but more ordinary documentaries and things like that. And I saw this person sitting there looking at a book that I had done in about 2005 or something like that, and he was going through it, and I said, "Do you like that? Do you like that book?" He says, yeah, I've been looking for this for a long time. I bought it over at the Strand bookstore." And I said, "Well, I'm really glad you like it. If you won't, I'll sign it for you because it's my book." And he says, "Oh, wow." And I signed the book for him. But just, what day was it? One day last week, I'm very lucky in that I live next door to the largest and best independent bookstore in the United States. With the possible exception, there's a wonderful bookstore, I believe it's in Seattle, called Powell's. Maybe it's bigger, I don't know. The Strand bookstore in New York is 5 floors of great stuff. And they had a big pile of a reissue of one of my books from the 1970s. And I went and looked at that, but nobody was buying. I should have. The last time that I saw that book there, it was next to a pile of a photo book that featured naked ladies. And my guess is that putting my photographs from the 1930s next to the naked people are going to grab the naked ladies first. I don't know. But whatever. Yeah. But would I say something? No, I'm kind of shy. I don't say, look at me, buy that book. I don't do that.
Sure. Well, what do you hope that someone who does read the book, what do you hope they take from it?
Okay, I'll tell you a story. This is true. This is a true story that happened maybe a month and a half or 2 ago. I get an email from somebody whose name is Bev, like B-E-V, Brown, like Brown. And she is saying how she just thinks this is the most wonderful book she's ever, blah, blah, blah. And it turns out she's in the book. She lives in Carthage, a little town in East Texas. And it turns out that she was a student of my father. Now think about this. My father stopped teaching in 1942 and went to war. So it's got to be prior to 1942. She was one of the sponsors or something of one of his ROTC companies when she was in high school. So that means she's not 12. As a matter of fact, I think she's 93 or 94. But the nice thing is, I mean, she's not young, and she's on the computer sending emails to people and things like that. And she told a story on him that was absolutely wonderful. And the story was this, that, say it's 1941 or 40 or whenever, and the school in Kilgore, Texas, has a sister school in Shreveport. And the two ROTC programs do joint things. And the girls and boys from Kilgore will date the girls and boys from Shreveport and so forth. And the dance that a dance was coming up, and it was going to be in Shreveport. So he says, your father commandeered a bus and put all of the students from Kilgore on the bus, and we're in our ball gowns, and the boys are all dressed up nicely and so forth. And we head east to Shreveport, and we get to the Louisiana border, and he stops the bus. He's driving the bus. He stops the bus, and he makes all of the girls in their gowns and whatnot get out of the bus and walk across the border. Because then, as now, there is something called the Mann Act, M-A-N-N Act, and it is a law about transporting women across a state line for immoral purposes. So he made them walk. He made us walk across the border, just in case we were naughty in Shreveport. And that's a very
Oh.
sweet story.
Yeah.
And I wrote her back and I said, Bev, that is a great story. Write it up, put it in the paper, put it somewhere, elaborate on it, tell all the details. And I don't know whether she has done that or not, but it's a very sweet story.
Yeah.
I would have put it in here if it hadn't already been printed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just one more kind of fun hypothetical question for you. Say that your parents' story was made into a movie. Who would you want to cast for your parents?
Well, the picture of my mom makes me think of sort of like Joan Crawford or somebody in Grand Hotel, or even earlier, when she was an ingenue. But you're talking about somebody today, an actress today?
It could be at any time. It could be back
I know
then or
that
today.
in my mom's scrapbook, she had a picture of Ronald Colman, who both of them really liked a lot, and he had a small mustache, much in the same way that my father did. So I don't know. Maybe that would be, maybe that would be a possibility. But beyond that, I don't know. If they were going to turn that into something, well, that would be figured out by Mr. Director Man and a committee of Wall Streeters and movie people and things like that you have no control over whatsoever.